Broadcasting from Ireland, featuring interviews with some of the biggest names in magic. Welcome to the Deceive Reality Podcast with your hosts, David Peace and Steve Spade.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deceive Reality Podcast. We hope you all had a great Christmas, New Year and everything like that, as much as you can in these times. And we're back here today, kicking off with a bang with Marc Paul. Marc, how are you doing?
I'm very well, guys. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So, thanks for the invitation.
No problem. And we always start off the podcast asking people, at least in 2020, how they got into magic. But I think an interesting question from like a mentalist to a mentalist is at what point did you decide to go fully into the mentalism realm? From a lot of people start in magic and then really get gravitated towards that. So how did that really start for you?
Yeah, well, I same route as a lot of people. You know, when I was a kid, I was given a magic set. I had the Hocus Pocus Junior #2, it was called. And the very first trick I learned was it was like a sort of a stunt. It was like balancing a playing card, and then you put a glass on top of it. And, it was just like a sort of T-shaped card. And that started me off. And I was about 8 when I got given that magic set, and the reality was it got thrown up in the cupboard. I couldn't do half the tricks. I didn't understand it, and I was really disappointed because, of course, it's not real magic. You're expecting it to happen, and actually you got to learn some sort of trick. So it sat up in the cupboard for a few months, and then I was off ill from school, and my mum had gone to work, and I was bored, so I was rummaging through the toy cupboard, and I got out the magic set. And in the magic set was a coin slide. You know, the old coin slide to make a coin disappear. And the amazing thing was I put a coin in it, and I must have accidentally turned it round, because when I put it in the slide, the coin disappeared. And I experienced this moment of real magic. It was like, wow, that's just disappeared. It just happened. And then, of course, a few seconds later, I hear it rattling around in the slide. And then it's like, how do I get it out? Of course, I haven't read the instructions. I'm a man, of course not. So that's sort of what kicked it off. And through my teenage years, I put together a sort of cabaret magic act. And it was very, straightforward material. It was things like Chinese sticks, 6-card repeat, sucker dying silks, invisible deck. It was all those sort of classic routines that I sort of started learning and buying from magic dealers. And that is what I did until my sort of 18th, 19th year, when I moved to London. And I started working for Marvin's Magic. And I was introduced to this whole area in London of close-up magic. So the close-up magic then kicked off because I was doing that in the evenings. And there was a show that Richard McDougall put on called Ever So Slightly, which was a fantastic show. People like Chris Power and JJ performing, and Richard McDougall himself. And I used to do a sort of spot in that. And I remember from those cabaret days, from being a sort of kid magician, the one thing that people talked about in my show was a telephone directory test. It was in Lewis Ganson. It was a Lewis Ganson in the Lewis Ganson book, and it was a John Booth routine. And I don't know why I'd included this sort of as a teenager, but it was the thing that people talked about afterwards. It was the thing that, that's what people remembered. So when I started doing Ever So Slightly, when I'm about 19, 20 years old, I thought, I'll put that in, and I'll put other sort of mental stuff around it. And that's what I did. And that's what kicked it off for me, because it was suddenly like, oh my gosh, this gets so much impact. Because, people afterwards were chatting about it, and some people thought it was real, and this amazing talent I have, and so on. So I realized the power of mentalism when I was about 19 years old. And I started sort of doing a mentalism act probably in the early 90s. So, I was sort of there doing it before Darren, before, Andy Nyman and I used to have chats about mentalism. This was way before Darren. This was when he was a demonstrator at Marvin's Magic. And we were basically the only two people doing mentalism in London, other than Graham Jolly. But Graham Jolly was a sort of different generation. He was this sort of older generation. So it was really just the two of us sort of messing around with it. And we were both doing mentalism sort of in the sort of early 90s, 94, 95, round about there. And that's sort of when it started, and that's when it kicked off. And there was one really sort of primal reason why I shifted to mentalism, and that was because I'm not funny. You know, everyone was doing sort of Daniel's lines or Wayne Dobson's line. They were doing the sort of stand-up cheeky chappy magician at that time, and that just didn't suit me. And I wanted magic that was powerful and impactful and made people, you know, really stand up and pay attention. And the mentalism did that for me. So that's why I sort of, again, went down that route. I've learned over the years that you do need to have that comedy. You do need to have the amusement and stuff in it. But essentially, that's what sort of kicked it all off.
Perfect. We had a comment in there from Paul saying hello, and he's awaiting your lecture with interest. So I think that's about Mindventions coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, Mindvention coming up. Yeah, it's the 16th, 17th, and 18th of this month. The lineup's phenomenal. I mean, I'm so honoured to be asked to be part of it. I mean, it's it's great.
And you don't have to travel.
He'd been asking me for years to do it, and I'd never been around. I'd always been away. I'd been, working or on one cruise or something like that. And so, of course, we're all here at home. That's why Danny's got some great people together.
That's what we were able to get to, Mark.
That's true too. That's true.
Yeah. Once the pandemic's over, we'll have no guests on the podcast anymore, which will just be a problem.
Yeah.
But you'll be so busy, you won't be doing the podcast anymore. That's
hopefully.
You
did some work for Marvin's Magic. We actually had Marvin on just before the Christmas break,
I saw that. Yeah.
And you mentioned that. What was that like working as for Marvin's Magic at that time? It was really just kicking off.
Well, I tell you what, guys. I mean, if there are any young, aspiring magicians, performers watching, doing some sort of demonstrating, whether it's in a magic shop, or whether it's for somebody like Marvin, it is fantastic experience because what you're getting to do, okay, you might be learning some basic tricks like Svengali or dynamic coins or cups and balls, something like that. And you're going to learn a basic routine, but that routine is a pitch routine. It's a routine that's designed to sell the trick. And you're going to do that hundreds of times a day. I mean, when I used to sell Svengali decks, I literally did the Svengali dem probably 120, 130 times a day. And you wouldn't sell a deck of cards every time you did it, but you would sell, probably in the region of 100 decks of cards, in over the course of the day. Now, when you're trying to sell something and you're on commission, so obviously the more you sell, the more you're going to earn. It naturally makes you perform in a certain way. You're selling the effect. And you soon realize that when you come out of that, if you're going to start performing in the evenings and you're doing your own show, it's the same situation, except you're not selling the physical trick. You're selling the effect of the trick, and you're selling yourself, your personality. So I would say it's great experience. I mean, I worked for Marvin between 1988 and 1995. I think it was. And although I was also doing some close-up stuff in the evenings, that was my bread and butter. It was during the day working and demonstrating and selling tricks. Fantastic experience.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely, like, you hone it. And I think it's good practice as well. It's something that I think a lot of people find out when they start doing close-up gigs and you're doing your 5-minute set at every table. By the time you get to the 8th table, you're dead and you don't really care anymore.
Well, this was how it was in the trade show floor for me as well, because as a demonstrator and used to pitching a trick all day long, I could go out on the trade show, the trade show floor, and do the same thing. Pitch a 10-minute routine, or a message-based routine, or even a presentation, and I could just do it back to back. And a lot of the sort of trade show performers, they don't do that. They do a presentation maybe once every half an hour. So they're doing like a 10-minute presentation twice an hour. And you know what, for me, that's when your energy goes down. If you've got these big gaps of time in between performing, that's when I start to sag. Whereas if I'm working all day long, then I just keep going, And of course, that is a fantastic benefit for the client, because the client sees that you're working, and you're going to drive more people through the stand that way. So it's a no-brainer for me. So having that stamina and building up to it, I think is a great thing, and it's worth it's worth building that stamina, because you never know when you're going to quite be performing. You might be a close-up magician and asked to do some sort of big garden party event that lasts all day. So you want to be able to get out there and be able to do that, and develop your voice as well. So your voice is able to handle that amount of talking. And the other key thing that demonstrating tricks does is it teaches you people skills. It teaches you to engage people. Simple things like, I'll be walking down the street and I'll see some sort of telesales marketing person, and they always start with a question. They're like, oh, do you mind if I stop you? And it's like, it's all apologetic. And you can't do that. You can't do that. And it's the same when you're working tables. You can't walk up to a table and go, would you like to see a magic trick? Because it's too easy for the group to say no. And it was the same in selling magic tricks. You never start with a question. It was always, let me show you something amazing. I mean, it's a direct statement, which requires the person to pay attention. And those sort of things I still apply nowadays if I'm entertaining at a table, or if I'm on the trade show floor. It's that. Let me show you something amazing. I'm going to show you the world's fastest card trick. It's that. You want a hook that hooks people in. So Marvin's Magic, great background, and it's learning all those skills and then applying it to your sort of further magical career afterwards.
I think something I noticed, I watched a video of you during Norton's antivirus at a trade show. Yes. And you were doing a lot of like some card stuff and like a cut and restore rope, which when you think Marc Paul Mentalist, that's not really what you see. But I think that definitely adds to it. And do you do a lot of just traditional stuff when you're performing close-up still, or do you go into the try and stick with mentalism?
Well, when I'm on a trade show floor, I will use what I feel is the best routines for the trade show floor. And a lot of the times, visual stuff works better. And for that particular Norton antivirus, I think it was when they launched Norton 360. So for me, the idea of a piece of rope that you can tie together in a loop to create the 360, and it just naturally fitted, because if I remember correctly, it was something like, the whole point of, you can have you think your data is all tied up, but there are very clever hackers out there that can cut into your data stream, and that's when you cut the rope.
It was also half price at times, which is
those sort of lines exactly. But then the whole point of Norton 360 was this gives you this sort of perimeter security that you can't break through. So it just lent itself to it. And I've always been one for choosing the right material for the right environment. And I also feel, I've worked on cruise ships for a big part of my career, and you're standing on a stage in front of an audience of 1,000 people, and you're doing a live show. And I'm not famous, and yet I'm getting an audience of 1,000 people there. and there's a buzz, there's an atmosphere, and they come to see you, and you can take them on a journey through a mentalism show, which will blow their minds. They will be talking about it on the ship for days afterwards. Now, because I've experienced that, when I go on to, say, a close-up environment where I'm entertaining round tables, and there's an MC that keeps interrupting, and there's music in the background, and the courses are being served, I just don't get the same reaction with mentalism that I can get on stage. So for me, mentalism isn't as effective in a close-up environment. Now, I'm not saying you can't do mentalism in a close-up environment. Of course you can, you know, I mean, and I've done it. You know, you can do center tails, you can do a nail writer routine, you can do whatever, you know, it's all that stuff is fine. But it just doesn't impact as well as it does when you have more time and an audience paying more attention to it. Yeah. For me, when I'm in a close-up environment, visual magic works better. It gets better reactions. It works better, you know. And some of the time, I mean, I do, for example, like a nudist deck routine in close-up, and you know that gets fantastic reactions, and I can do the whole routine completely silently. You know, if it really is loud in the venue, all I've got to do is sort of point to my eye, point to the card, and start doing the routine. And, you know, people watch visual magic happening. So for me, sometimes mentalism isn't the right choice for that sort of environment, I think.
I think I'm similar, because like on stage, when I do a stage show, it's 100% mentalism. But then close up, I'll do ambitious card routine, vanish a ring, but then I'll also do like a peek or drawing duplication, or even just force the card on someone, just to have because it's kind of whatever I enjoy. But I do think the visual stuff is important, especially in loud environments, and then more when you're in maybe a casual area hanging out afterwards in like the pipe and clipper moment, or just in more of a casual setting. Mentalism can work well because it is about attention, because you can't have someone for 5 minutes to sit there silently as you read someone's mind in the middle of a 3-course meal. It doesn't really work.
I think it's in Absolute Magic, Darren talks about when he used to work as a close-up magician in Bristol. And it's interesting because Darren would do his magic stuff, and then if he'd had a particularly good table, he would go back to that table, and it would be like, I've got something really special for you, but this really needs you to be quiet and to pay attention, because, you know, it's really hard to do. And he would do a piece of mentalism which required more focus and required more attention of his audience. And that's exactly what he's asked from them. Yeah. And I thought that was actually a very clever approach. So he's not going out there and doing a book test on every table. He's doing the magic, which he's getting great reactions with. But then the mentalism is something special that's being added on. I mean, look, I know there's a lot of guys that do mentalism out there. And all I would say is, if you're doing mentalism, if you're doing it in that environment, a table hopping environment, it's got to be quick and impactful, and you know, something really simple like a nail writer routine. You know, you walk up to the table and it's like, you know, I'm the mind reader. I'm going to do something amazing for you. Watch this. I'm going to write something down. Okay, I've written down a number. I'm going to bombard you with numbers. 23, 32, 75, 47, 82. Name a first two-digit number that comes into your head. 17. You turn it around. It's 17. You know, I mean, it's got to be boom, 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 boom. It's got to be sort of quite fast and pacey. You know, the trouble with mentalism is there is a lot of procedure sometimes. Even in a billet routine, you know, you've got to hand out pieces of paper, pencils, get something written down, collect them back in. You know, all of that happens before the effect starts happening. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I just think it's I think one of the skills I've had in my performance career is recognizing what material is right for what environment. You know, I would turn up to do a corporate show, and just because of the layout of the room, I'd be like, you know, I'm not going to do that routine. I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to put this one in instead, and just choosing the material that I felt comfortable with in that environment. So that's definitely something to consider. You know, don't just because you've learnt the new book test doesn't mean it's a great thing to do in the next environment you're working in.
Yeah, definitely. We had a message in from one of our previous guests, Nicholas Kin, wrote in going, "Hi there, a question. How do you deal with so-called hecklers or challenges from your audience after the show?" And he also says, "P.S. The beard suits you." So he enjoys Mark.
Hecklers during the show or hecklers after, did he say?
It seems to be after, because I think especially on cruise ships when you're going to be mingling with people after the show, I guess, okay. Just in your life.
Because I think, you see, it's interesting because with a mentalism show, I don't have hecklers. So during the show, you don't have people calling out because, you know, I am playing it semi-serious. You know, I'm not, you know, it isn't a sort of a laugh-a-minute show. It's sold as an amazing show. So if you're engaging your audience and you're taking them on that journey and they're amazed by what you're doing, then you really don't get hecklers sort of during the show, especially if you're playing that sort of authority figure. If you seem like you are somebody who's in charge of what they're doing, which I think you have to be when you're a mentalist. But yes, that's very interesting because Nicholas is hit on the perfect thing there. And this does happen. After the show, the next day, for example, I might be wandering around the ship and I'm no longer that, you know, authority figure on the stage. I'm just a guy wandering around the ship about to go and, you know, have my breakfast or something. Yeah. So people do stop you and will chat about your show. And on occasion, you will have the, you know, the, oh, read my mind type of challenge, you know, that you get. And I have some sort of stock lines that I can use depending on the situation, you know, like, for example, a lot of the time I might meet someone in the lift and they might go, oh, read my mind. And I'll say, you're thinking about going up or something like that, you know. So it's just a glib comment. Or it'll probably be something like, you're thinking about going to the buffet, aren't you? You know, because that's where they're going. You know, that's where I'm going. So it's where everyone's going. So, you know, I will have that light line. If somebody pushes it a bit further, then I'll go down the route of saying, you know, for me, there's the perfect answer. The perfect answer is most of my routine on the cruise ship is a blindfold Q&A act. So, and part of the setup of that is I say I have to, you know, get rid of the my sense of sight so that I can tune into, you know, your thoughts, you know, more accurately. So I've got the perfect excuse to say, you know, well, you know, I'm not blindfolded. It takes me quite a long time to get into that sort of frame of mind. So, you know, so I can't tell you exactly what you're thinking of now, but I might be able to do. And then I'll do something really quick, you know, just something, you know, a star sign divination or something like that, something that's off the cuff. But I don't really want to perform. I want to work on stage. I don't want to perform. I mean, Darren had a great way of dealing with it as well, which he used to put out. I used to see him do it at parties at Andy Nyman's. He'd be walking around with a glass of wine, which he'd never drunk. He never drunk it. You know, he's there talking to people. And he's got this glass of wine, and if somebody asked him to read a mind, he'd say, oh, I'm really sorry, I've been drinking and I'm really not good at it when I've been drinking, you know. So it was that sort of excuse. And do you know what? You shouldn't perform every time somebody asks you to. You know, if I've done performance on the stage the night before, there is nothing that I'm going to be able to do in the buffet line that is going to be as impressive as what I did the night before. So, and a lot of the time on the ship, you might be doing a second show. So you can actually turn it into that. You say, I tell you what, if you come along to the second show, sit somewhere near the front and I'll get you involved. I'll get you up on stage and we'll do something amazing. And that tends to placate people as well, you know. And half the time they don't sit in the front row because they're then just worried about going on stage. So that deals with it too. So I hope that answers the question, Nicholas.
Yeah, he wrote in there, thank you for your answer. So I think that definitely answered. So I think that is a case that sometimes we're giddy and we just want to perform, and it can actually hurt our own reputation when it's like, I do have a new gimmick in my pocket.
Yeah. It is the old adage of, you know, less is more, really. You know, I think that's, you know, leave your audience wanting more. You know, don't ruin what you've created the night before or that evening, you know, because I see sometimes a lot of stage performers that they've done a cabaret at a corporate event and then they sort of go and network afterwards. And that's okay, of course, the networking part's okay, but then they might do something afterwards. And the reality is you've just done this amazing stuff on stage. And what you're doing here, you know, it's maybe not quite as impressive. It's still great, but it's not quite as impressive what you did there. And you can undermine your own reputation, definitely.
Especially if you've built your show to a crescendo, like predicting everything that's happened, predicting the lotto, and now you're like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you then do, which hand the coin is in type routine, you know, which is a great routine, but it's not as impactful as the predicting of the lottery and the prediction of the whole show. So don't do that, you know. And you know, it is another skill that really I have learned over the years through experimentation and through making mistakes. And that is, you know, don't perform all the time. You know, you perform when you want to perform. Definitely.
Yeah. I think something Luke Germais talked about that as well, about if you get asked, say maybe later, and then just keep saying, and he'll only perform if someone asks him 3 or 4 times, and then he's like, okay, they really want to, so now we'll do it. Yeah. We had another question come in there, actually, loads flying in. Hello, Mark. What was your biggest inspiration for your work in mentalism? So is any inspiration?
I would probably honestly say 2 people. I would say David Berglas, first of all. David, I first met David, well, I had seen him on television. He'd had a Channel 4 series here in the UK called The Mind of David Berglas. And I'd watched that when I was a 13, 14-year-old. And I was also watching Paul Daniels on BBC One at the same time. I was, you know, it was around about that time. And whereas Paul Daniels was doing stuff where I sort of saw the plots, I'd seen the plots, you know, Daniels might perform aerial fishing, and I'd read about aerial fishing, you know, in a Tarbell volume. So, you know, I sort of knew the plots and I recognized them from the Daniels show. With David Berglas, I don't recognize any of it. I'm like, this is amazing. This is mind-blowing. You know, how is all this prediction engraved on the bottom of a light sculpture and all of this stuff just seemed incredible to me. So I was a fan when I was about 13, 14 years old. So then, of course, to start working for Marvin, and the very first day I went up to London, I actually went up to do my Magic Circle exam, and I went into Hamleys to meet with Marvin, and David was in there as well. So I met David Berglas. It was like a big thing for me. And over the years, I saw David perform a lot, and I saw him work a lot with his card magic in just a social situation and doing things like the Berglas effect, you know, in those environments. And that sort of triggered off, I would say, the beginnings of understanding what impossibility is really about. You know, about a lot of the tricks that we do in mentalism, you know, they're not necessarily impossible. You know, they might be, for example, unlikely coincidences, and all of that is fine as a plot. But I think when I was younger, when you want to call yourself a magician, you want to do impossibilities. You want to do things that are amazing.
Yeah.
For me, it wasn't about getting the laughs. It was about getting the gasps of astonishment. And watching David, that's what it felt like to me. So going down the mentalism route was definitely the right thing. And then a little later on, I met John Fisher at the Magic Circle. I think it was in the Magic Circle. And you got to remember, this is the days way before YouTube and all of that stuff. And John Fisher had some tapes of Chan Canasta. And I sort of heard about Chan Canasta, but never seen him work. And this is way before David Britland's books about Chan Canasta. And I watched the first performance of Chan Canasta, and it was mind-blowing. It was just incredible. I mean, and of course, you know, just type in Chan Canasta and go to YouTube, and you'll see those same clips. There's essentially only two that are still around. There's a black and white one from the early 60s, where he does all this stuff, which is amazing, including the book test. And then there's a Parkinson show a little later on, where he fails with the book test, and you see his out, which was just brilliant to watch. So for me, I would say the two main influences, David Bergloff, Chan Canasta, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, two pretty good ones, I have to say. I think they did inspire a lot of people. One thing's working on like cruise ships and stuff like that, and especially traveling around the world. As a mentalist, even when performing locally, you will run into people who don't speak English the best, and it might be their second language. Do you have any sort of advice for people who, when you are doing a mind reading or some sort of mentalism effect, which uses language a lot, when the person doesn't speak English as their first language?
Well, I work on British and American cruise ships, so. Almost always it's a very large contingent of English speakers, but on occasion you'll have quite a few Asian guests. You know, you might have some Japanese guests or some Chinese guests or whatever, and they will come to the show, and the cruise director might tell you, oh, we've got 20 Japanese in tonight or something like that. And I always, with doing the Q&A, I always try and make sure that a card goes out to one of those people as well, because when it comes back in, you might be able to work with it. And I'll tell you what, if you can work with it, you will bring the house down with it. I remember I used to do a book test, and after I did the book test, this little, Asian woman stood up and waved her. She's holding this book, and she doesn't say anything. She's just waving the book around like this, and you can't sort of ignore her. So I went up to her and I took the book, and it's all Japanese characters. That's what it is. It's just it's a book in Chinese or Japanese, or I didn't even know what it was. I have no idea, but it's just characters. It's vertical and so on. And do you know what? What I did is I got her up, and and with just broken English, I did what I did was my AAA book test, and so I'm flicking through, and obviously I'm going to peek what she's going to look at. Now I have no idea what it says, but for me, I can just imagine it. I can picture it, and I draw it the best I can. It's a drawing duplication. That's essentially what it is. So I'm drawing the lines, and I'm trying to create it as much as possible. And I keep it hidden from her, and then I say, to tell everyone what it is, and she. This word comes out that is totally unpronounceable, and I turn it around and I show her, and she freaked out. She was freaked out, I still don't know what it said or anything. It was just a drawing duplication. So if you've got to be careful, because you don't want to involve somebody that's non-English in the show, and then for it to fail. I'll give you another example, and this is actually probably something you could apply to any show. I do a routine where I'm going to just tell someone the word they're thinking of. And it's not a book test. So all it is going to be is they're going to write it down. I'm going to see that word at some point. But because of the nature of the reveal, I asked them to write a short word, maybe 4 or 5 letters long. This is something that's early in the show. So it justifies the fact we're still warming up. We're building up with the mind reading. Now, sometimes I will get, say, a German person on stage who can speak English, but I ask them to write a word in German that is 4 or 5 letters long. And for me, it's the same thing. I'm going to see it. So although I might not know what the word is, I can duplicate the word. And you have that similar effect. You have them vocalizing what the word is and you revealing it. And that is so much more impactful than having an English person do it. Just by changing. And the method is the same. It's no more difficult because it's going to be a 4 or 5 letter word. But the impact is much, much stronger, much stronger. It's a perfect example of, mentalism. It's all about presentation. It's all about the plot. It's all about the reveal of the information. So that's something that you could pretty much apply if you have got some foreign speaking person in your audience, as long as you're geared up to it and maybe you restrict them. So, you don't want them to write a word that's, 11 letters long, because if you don't know what it is, and if you're doing a peak, which essentially this is what it was, you don't want it too long, because obviously it's like, oh, what does that say? And you can't memorize it. But 4 or 5 letters, no problem.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice. And I think it's the one thing as well I found is even being able to speak from 1 to 10 in French or German or Spanish. And then, because in my area, there's a lot of call centers for European support for Apple and Amazon and things like that.
Yeah.
So you can get, your corporate gig is multilingual. So just being able to force a card on someone, it's a 4, so you say 4 in their language as if you're reading it from them.
And just having a few phrases, even if you can just greet people, if you can say hello or welcome or something like that in the other person's language, it absolutely eases things and smooths things, But remember, if predominantly most of your audience is English speaking, you want to use this sparingly. This is a one-off type effect that you want to sort of impact with your audience, as it were. If you are working for a whole audience of foreign-speaking people, you shouldn't be there, to be honest. If you don't speak that language, you're going to have a hard time, I would say.
Yeah, I think I'll struggle to be pulling out your book test, being like, does anybody read this language? Definitely. And the continuing game for those watching of the disappearing Steve Spade has continued, thanks to the wonders of the internet. But it's his new vanishing act. He's been working on it all quarantine. It's going quite well. But we've another question actually from Nicholas. I think that there. Your thoughts on being mysterious to your audience member. Do you agree that your stage performer and everyday persona should be the same? I guess it depends on.
I would say my stage persona is a natural extension of who I am in real life, but it's a more authoritative, more forceful type of character on stage, I would say. I'm in control on stage, and I'm a bit more maybe demanding on stage in terms of do this, do that, type of thing. So it's the old advice. You've got to look in the mirror, and you have got to be honest with what you see there. You've got to be honest with who you are, and you've got to develop an on-stage persona that is in line with that. If you're 18 and you've got acne, you can't be Channing Pollock on stage. That is, you can't be the elegant Dove performer. I use Channing Pollock as an example. Maybe I should be talking about like you're not somebody more modern like Lance Burton. You're not that character. What you are is a young Mark Zuckerberg, nerdy character. So if you're doing lightning calculations in your head and you're doing stuff like that, that fits with who you are. So So sometimes by understanding clearly who you are, your character, and how an audience will perceive you actually defines your material. It actually makes choosing material a lot easier. And can I just say, I was thinking today about what we're doing here tonight, and I thought about things that I sort of wanted to say. And one of the things that came up is if there are young performers watching, can I give you a big piece of advice? If you're young, and you don't have to be young in age. I mean, you could be a young performer. You may be just starting performing. Don't be a mentalist, because there are thousands of mentalists. When I started in the 90s, it was me and Andy Nyman. There was no one else other than Graham Jolly as the pro. We were out on a limb, and we were doing it for different reasons than copying the bandwagon that's out there at the moment. So don't be a mentalist, because everybody's a mentalist. My wife saw Ben Hart do the linking finger rings the other night. He did a TV show for Scottish TV. She'd never seen that routine before. She was blown away by that routine. She thinks it's the best thing she's ever seen a magician do. Now, this is a classic effect that we all know about, and we don't do it because we're bloody mentalists. So there is so many great things out there. And the reality is, if you want to be successful, and I don't mean famous, I mean successful in what you do, get a regular source of bookings, you want to have something that's a little bit different. And being a good visual magician at the moment is actually a little bit different. If you want to really sort of try and build up a bit of maybe fame behind you, if you become, say, a pickpocket, there's only a couple of people doing pickpockets in this country. So you could build up that's how you would get on TV, because you're the first pickpocket on TV. There's no pickpockets around. Maybe if you still like the mentalism route, concentrate on the hypnotism, because there's sort of fewer people doing the hypnosis side of things. So sort of think about things like that. If you're a young performer, and I don't mean young in age, if you're just a new performer, don't necessarily follow in line with everything else that's going on. Think about that character and who you are, and don't try to be somebody else. Just try. And Ben Hart, I think, is a fantastic example of this. He's a young, good-looking kid, and he's doing great visual magic. And he's doing visual magic that's here. So we're seeing him, and we're seeing what he's doing, and he's creating miracles.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So Steve did the right thing by being an escape artist and not really liking mentalism.
Yes,
so.
yes, exactly. Yeah, sorry, Steve. Of course, yeah, being an escapologist, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're absolutely right to go down that route, because there's only one escapologist out there at the moment, and that's Jonathan Goodwin. And that's the only one who's got any sort of profile. So anything. Yeah, and at the moment, there's this sort of popular theme for a group of magicians to do a show, like the Illusionists, and they want a mind reader, and they want a magician and an illusionist and an escapologist. Now there might be 200 mentalists auditioning for the mentalist role, but if you're the only escapologist, you're going to get the role. So it's that as well.
I like to dabble into kind of everything too. I do magic, and I do mind reading, and I've done hypnosis, and I've done blindfold drives and all that kind of things too. So I like to be kind of a jack of all trades within the magic world a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, and it's good to experiment with different things, because again, you find what suits you and what you're good at.
Definitely.
What your audience likes as well. Don't forget to listen to your audience, because that's very important too. If the audience doesn't like what you're presenting, doesn't matter how much you like it, it's not going to work. And it also works the other way around. I mean, I've said this before. I am not a fan of the magic square at all. But I happened to be on a ship and my luggage got lost, and I did a magic square routine, and this was years ago, and the impact was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so, although I personally don't like Magic Square, I do a Magic Square because my audience loves the Magic Square. So, so that's the other sort of flip side of the coin as well. Don't, if there's a trick you don't necessarily like, but your audience likes it, then that should be part of your show.
It can work the other way too, Mark. You could be working on an effect that you really like. The audience doesn't feel for it at all,
And you know what? And then it's scrapped. It has to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As Dave likes to say, then it just becomes ambitious carrot or something.
Very true.
It's one of the things that you go, no, it's not the trick. I just didn't perform it right. I'll get it right next time. And then 2 years later, eventually, it's like, okay.
Well,
it's just
magic. And there is that element as well, because sometimes you have to get a feel for the presentation of something. That is very true as well. So don't throw it out after one performance, but just bear that in mind.
Read into it, I think, is the good thing. So we have a segment on the show, and we'll go through a few more because loads of questions come in as well, so I'll jump back to them. But I think I'm going to ask you to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is basically a segment on the show where we ask our guests to tell a story of a show or a performance started off good, might have went bad or even ugly, usually to hilarious consequences.
Okay, I have one that is burnt into my memory. All right, so let me set the scene. We're on a cruise ship now. A lot of cruise ship audiences are very elderly, because they're the people with the time and the money to go on long cruises. So sometimes you might be walking out in front of an audience which is, maybe the youngest person there is in their 70s, or in their late 60s. So, and it's upwards from that. So it's an older audience that I'm working for. And, the show's been going well, and I'm about to finish the show, and I'm closing with a billet routine. So the billets have gone out, and somebody's thinking of a childhood friend, somebody's thinking of a, childhood pet. It's that type of routine. Now, it's a one ahead. I'm going to get, by tearing up one of the billets and getting rid of it, I'm doing a center tear, and I'm going to see the information. So I know that the billet I've got is from the person who is thinking of their, their pet, their childhood pet. And, and I've been open with that. I've been sort of like, think of a childhood pet. Could be a cat, dog, could be something unusual, but, think of the child, but think of the name of the pet. So I'm tearing the billet up, and I get my glimpse, and my heart literally stops, because what I'm glimpsing there is the N word. Okay. N-I-G-G-E-R is staring me in the face. And I'm like, now, I can't say this word on stage. This is impossible to say this on stage, because you're just going to offend people. Now, I'm realizing also it's innocent, because this guy's really old, and he obviously had a little, dog or whatever it was at the time, and that's what he named it. But where'd you go with this? I've already done the other part of the routine, so this is the close of the show. So I'm standing there, so I'm like, this is a black dog, am I right? Yeah, yes, it is a black dog. It's like, okay, good, we're doing all right. So,
where'd you go?
And so I write down, I do N, and I do that star, whatever R at the end. So, I'm not writing the word. And then I realize, in order for this to play out in any shape or form, he's got to say the word. So I'm on stage, and I'm like, this is the close of the show. I can't turn it around and show him. That's not going to work. He's like, right in the middle of the audience. So I have to get him to say it. And he stands up and clearly shouts the word to the room. He's got no moral compass at all. This is fine in his mind. And the whole audience literally goes, oh! There's this big sharp intake of breath. And I literally turn around this board to and walk off. Now,
Wow.
the thing is this. 2 weeks later, I'm on a different cruise ship. And I kid you not, the same word comes up again. I mean, it's unbelievable. But it comes up in a different place in the routine. And do you know what? I just don't reveal it. I just fail. I just fail on it. I can't get in tune. I just fail. I've learnt my lesson. And luckily enough, I have the second part of the routine. So I ended with a climax fine. But what that taught me is if I go onto a ship where it's old people, I do not do that routine. I do not do a childhood pet's name. I don't go anywhere near that because it is just too possible it might happen. You know, I had an elderly aunt who unfortunately passed away this year, but she's just a different generation, and she would use words in different ways than we can use them. And it was just normal and natural for that generation. And regardless of whether it's right or wrong, I don't think there was anything malice behind their use of that word, but that's how it was. So I've learnt my lesson, and that routine gets scrapped if I look at the audience and go, oh my God, that's old people. We're not doing that tonight.
No.
Wes Barker, we had Wes Barker on from Canada, the magician, and he said the same thing when he's on cruise ships. He tries to stay away from some routines for that reason.
Yeah, it's just, you learn your lesson. You absolutely learn your lesson. And that is probably the worst experience I have had on stage. I mean, because it was so bad from so many different perspectives. The word's bad, having him say it's bad, and it's the end of the show and it goes nowhere. I mean, it was just horrendous. I mean, luckily there were no complaints about it. It was like, it wasn't, it became a bit of a joke the next day that this guy had called his dog that, so it was
if it keeps happening, Mark, you should be, and go back to your seat, check underneath your seat, there's an envelope, open up the envelope. Yes. But don't open it up here, open it up when you go home.
Yes, absolutely. I now carry a piece of paper in my breast pocket. This is
And just hope you don't ever get knocked down and someone goes, oh, does he have any ID? Oh, there's a piece of paper. Oh, wow. Put that back in the jacket. Never look at that again.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably the worst. I will tell you that this didn't happen to me, but just for the close-up environment. I used to have a company called Dynamic Effects Limited. So it used to be me and Paul Andrews, Antonio, and Nick Reed. So we're a group of 4 magicians, and we've marketed ourselves to do Christmas parties, and it was quite a good model actually, because what we did is we sold ourselves to corporate event companies. So we only had to find maybe 5 or 6 corporate event companies, and from those 5 or 6 companies, we got maybe 5 or 6 gigs from each company. So, that was spread over the course of the year. And it's great because they wanted multiple performers. They were big banquets. And instead of phoning up 5 or 6 magicians, one phone call to us, and they would have the 4 of us, and we would find a couple of other people that would come with us, so one phone call to us solved it for them. And I remember one Christmas, I am with Paul Andrews. And he's working at the table, and it was at the Dorchester, and it was particularly grumpy waiting staff. I think this is probably like the 20th, 30th event they've done that week. They're just fed up of it, and they're fed up of close-up magicians being in the way and all of this stuff. So it's just ripe for it to sort of go wrong. Anyway, Paul is working at the table next to me, and he's working, and suddenly I hear this massive, this yelp from him. And what's happened? There's a woman stood behind him. She's got a serving fork, and she's just jabbed it right in his backside. He's literally got this fork stuck in the cheek of his arse.
Oh my God!
And that Christmas, we were on that Christmas gig with Sheba Cassini, who is a caricature artist, and her Christmas card for that year was that incident encapsulated on the front. There was a table with this magician leaping over the top of the table with a serving fork stuck in his backside. so anything, this job is dangerous, guys.
Dangerous. I once got a paper cut, so like
tough crowd, Mark. Tough crowd.
Funny. So we're just coming up on the hour there, so I'm just going to we can go rapid fire maybe to a couple of questions that come in. There's one here which is what is your favorite magic / mentalism show you've ever seen live?
Good question.
Oh, Darren, without doubt. I think Darren's Enigma show, probably, because I watched it with Daisy Burglass, and we're watching Especology being performed by Darren, so it was amazing. And a close second to that, I think, is probably Darren doing the Oracle, doing blindfold Q&A routine, which was amazing as well. So yeah, definitely. But also, seeing Chan Canasta, I have to say, Chan Canasta doing the book test is amazing. So anyway, sorry, still wittering on, aren't I? We're going to do a rapid fire. Go on.
Did Michael Parkinson ever ask you to perform for him again or keep in contact? It's great having to be able to perform for him in the past.
Yeah, there's a long story attached to that as well. But briefly, the short answer is no. But it was really unfortunate, because what happened in that situation was, after the Parkinson show, the BBC was very interested in me to do a show on the BBC, and they asked me to write a pilot, which I did. They really liked it, and they asked me to write 8 shows, which I did, and they really liked. And at that point, Darren broke through. So it was like, oh, well, it's being done on another. And in the world of television, it seems that you can have half a dozen TV chefs on TV at the same time. You can have dozens of comedians on TV at the same time.
Yeah.
But you can't have magicians like that. For some reason, whoever has invented the rules, there seems to be one popular magician on TV, and that's it. So, when Darren broke through with the success of the Channel 4 series, BBC weren't interested in a magic show anymore, or a mind reading show, which is what it was going to be. So it never happened.
So you've got a Darren Brown voodoo doll somewhere that you just keep pinning.
No, I'll be honest, he does it much better. I mean, that whole TV thing, he absolutely nailed, and it's great. And some of the TV work I've done, I haven't really enjoyed it. I enjoy the live performance, and TV is it's a difficult beast to tame. It really is. And other performers before me have found the same thing. And either you sell your soul to it, and it's TV is what you do, or you use it to up your profile a bit, and then carry on doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people see it as the way to just sell tickets for their stage show.
Yeah. And that is what it should be for. I mean, I used to go along to the recordings of Paul Daniels, and I got to sort of chat to him afterwards, and got to sort of, hang out with him. And that's what he told me. He said the model for the Paul Daniels magic shows was entirely to sell theatre tickets, to have enough profile and celebrity that when he toured with a theatre show, he was selling out. And if you think about it, it makes monetary sense as well. I mean, look at Darren. Darren will fill a 1,000-seat theatre at 50 quid a time. So, there's £50,000 of revenue coming in. And, Darren's company is getting the bulk of that. It's normally an 80-20 split with a theatre, and he's getting 80% of it. Not Darren personally necessarily, but the company is getting 80%. So it's and that's just one night. That's you're not going to get 50 grand for doing a TV series, let alone So it was always the model. It still is nowadays. Hence the whole YouTube vlogging type thing where you're trying to up profile to lead to something else, really.
Yeah.
Do you think, Mark, as like a publicity stunt type thing for a mentalist? I mean, as an escape artist, I can do a stunt, but I mean, when a mentalist, it's nearly always like a newspaper prediction or a find an object kind of thing. Do you think things like that are still kind of relevant in a kind of a more virtual world?
Yes, I think they are. It's hard, isn't it? If you look at one of the big examples, Burglas having the box over, it was over Regent Street. So it was the cross where Regent Street crosses Oxford Street. So in Oxford Circus, there was this box hanging in the air, and it was up there for a week with a big sign pointing at it saying, what's in the box, tune into David Burglas, on such and such TV. And he created a sensation with that because so many people saw it. And it's the same thing with YouTube or with social media. It's about getting people to see it. So we're deluged with stuff on social media. I am not a fan of social media. I have not used it anywhere near to full advantage. I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to that, and I recognize that. But there's also a part of me, there's part of me that can't stand some of the stuff that social media is all about. So it's hard. Yes, I think a good publicity stunt can work on social media, but are you going to get more than couple hundred people watching it? It's how you make it go viral. How do you get those thousands of people watching it? That's the tricky thing, because you're vying for everyone's attention, and their attention span is extremely short. And as we've talked about earlier with mentalism, it's like short attention spans is not good. You want something that's going to catch the eye. To be honest, if you hang yourself from a burning rope above the Thames and, you're on fire, and you show a 10-second clip of that on YouTube, that's going to get more hits than possibly something that's a mentalism type routine. That's the sort of reality we live in, I would say.
Yeah. Definitely think that's great advice. And not to end on a downer, but the last question is, what is the biggest problem now in mentalism, and why?
Oh, that is a big question. How long we got? We got another hour? No. The biggest problem in mentalism, and I alluded to it before, is too many people doing it. It's Anthony Owen, God rest him, used to say it's the new balloon modeling. And it is, because everybody does it. You're a kids magician and you're doing some mentalism in your kids show or whatever. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not having a go at kids performers. Of course, it's all fine. But mentalism's been done. We've done it. Everyone's done it. So if you want to make a name for yourself, if you want to have some level of fame, you've got to get outside of that model, and that's, I think, the biggest failing of mentalism at the moment. I suppose that's the honest answer, really.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of unoriginality. I think, as Steve was saying with the publicity stunts, like it's the same ones from 13 Steps. That how many years
yeah, that's true too. I think the problem with mentalism is, it lacks a visual element, or it can potentially lack the visual element. And we're actually very limited with plots, because really in mentalism, there are only two plots. And that is, you're either reading someone's mind or you're predicting something about the future. I mean, it all pretty much fits into those categories. Even if you're doing a lie detector test, well, how are you revealing the lie detector test? It's some prediction of something that's happening. So, we are limited with plots. And I think if you see lots of mentalism on TV and you see people doing mentalism and you start doing mentalism, you're restricting yourself, because there's this whole host of wonderful things out there. I mean, look, that we're in my study. That is my shelf of magic books. Okay. So all along there, that's an entire wall full of magic. And if you want to go right the way around the room, it's like, and then there's videotapes and there's more over in the corner and there's a cupboard in there that you can't see into. Now, this section down here, there's a couple of shelves there that are essentially mentalism books. And that's it. Those are the mentalism books. There is a little bit of memory. There's some memory books in there as well. But everything else is card tricks or illusions or general magic or silks or dove magic, or, you know, it's there's just a whole host of other stuff that's out there. So if you go down the mentalism route, you're just restricting what you're doing. I mean, I love mentalism. I'm not going to change because I'm too old and too long in the tooth, and it's what I know most. But, you know, I just think, you know, there's just a wealth of fantastic stuff out there. And you know what? David Berglos came to the same conclusion, because I when I turned professional, I had a conversation with him about, you know, what he suggested and, you know, advice and things like that. And his first line was, "Don't be a mentalist." I just like, you know, laughed and, you know. And, you know, I see what he meant. It was this argument, because if you're a mentalist, you are restricting what you're doing. And Berglos never wanted to be a mentalist. You know, he always called himself the, you know, the international man of mystery. And if you watched Berglos's stage show, yes, there was mentalism, but he did pickpocketing. You know, he did other stuff in the show. There would be a magic demonstration. There might be something, you know, there might be a memory demonstration. There might be stuff like that as well. But, you know, he was doing other stuff. He was doing magic and visual stuff. You know, not many people know that, you know, during the 50s, he had a flash act. It was all to do with, you know, flashes and flash paper and lights and stuff like that. So, you know, by becoming a mentalist, you do restrict what that material that's open for you. And I think we live in a day and age where, you know, you need to see more. You need to see more than what we're seeing at the moment in terms of, as you say, the same sort of headline predictions, the same sort of, you know, blindfold car drive or whatever. You know, I know they're classic plots and they're fine, but we're actually seeing a lot of people doing those. You know, you want to do something different. And there are other things that are out there, you know, like linking finger rings. You know, as I said earlier, you know, Ben Hart did that, blew my wife away. And she has seen a ton of magic and mentalists and mind reading. And just to finish on this note, Britain's Got Talent. All we're seeing on Britain's Got Talent is the same effect over and over and over again. It's all predictions. And yes, there's some very clever technology and some very clever methods that are going to that. But to my wife, it's the same trick. She literally turns off. You know, it's the same setup and it's the same reveal. Now, for us as mentalists, of course, it's not the same setup and the same reveal. They all are different. But to my wife, they're the same. It's the same effect. And you know what? She's right. They are the same effect. So, you know, we need to try and do something a little more creative, a little bit. And you know what? Being a good visual magician would get you there now.
And that's why we're going to say, when all this pandemic's over, we're going to have Marc Paul, escape artist, on fire in a straight jacket.
Yes, escape artist or a pickpocket or something.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. In 10 years' time, they're going to come back to this and be like, where did all these pickpockets come from? It's like, this is the part of the revolution.
Pickpocket is like the new balloon animals. It's just ridiculous.
There's pickpockets everywhere. But we'd like to say thanks so much to you, Marc, and thanks to everyone for watching, sending in the questions. And we're back next week again with a new guest. And if you have anything you want to plug, Marc, before we finish up?
No. I mean, I'm on Mindvention next week. So, you know, which is a great lineup. You know, if you are into mentalism and you want to watch, I mean, okay, I'm not going to include myself as part of this, but it is the world's best. I mean, you know, you've got people like Banachek, you know, all the way through, you know, Kennedy, you've got Richard Webster, you've got just the best mentalist in the world on at Mindvention. So it is a paid event, but it just looks like the best convention ever. So if you're around, it's the 16th, 17th, and 18th of January. Just put in Mindvention and it'll tell you all about it.
Definitely, and we'll put you up there with those people because your Penguin Live and Penguin really. I think your Penguin lecture was the second half of one of my shows, so that definitely came in handy. So yeah, thanks everyone, and I'm at David Peace Magic everywhere at Steve Spade, and make sure you go to deceivereality.com, Ireland's new magic shop. So, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.